But I'm very pleased now to be able to turn to a strong supporter of Liz Truss, former Home Secretary, former Chancellor of the Exchequer. Very pleased to welcome to the show Sajid Javid, MP for Bromsgrove. Sajid, hello.
Hi there. Good afternoon. How are you?
Very well. And sporting your new beard, I see, which you ran a poll on. I mean, that was a brave thing to do, wasn't it? So, anyway, listen.
Well, look, thanks for mentioning that, but I think there's really important things that you want to discuss, and I'm happy to discuss those too.
Absolutely. Two big things, really, I'd like to start on. In a nutshell, you're a former Chancellor. You'll recognise these sorts of figures with, I think the country's got now a national debt over 2 trillion. It's getting the threat of interest rate repayments of around 80 billion. And, of course, you've got an annual deficit that reminds us very much of the deficits that we were facing back in 2010 onwards. And yet, against that backdrop, your favoured candidate, Liz Truss, is promising immediate tax cuts and, if you like, a new orthodoxy at the Treasury. Look, that means more debt, doesn't it? And isn't that a huge gamble for the country?
Nick, the first thing I'd say, I mean, both Rishi and Liz, they're great people. They're both very capable. But like any Conservative Party member, I can only choose one to be the next leader, the next Prime Minister. And as you say, I think the right person, given that choice, is Liz. I think that for a number of reasons. I think she's more able to unite the party, for example. I think that's hugely important to look at the broad level of support she's got from across the party already. I think that she has the better economic policy, and that's what you've just asked me about, and I'll come back to that in a second, if I may. But also, I think all of that taken together, I think she's much better placed to go on to win the next election. And of course, as a Conservative, that matters a lot to me. On the economic point, I mean, I happen to think that getting the economy right and fixing that is the most important policy issue, not just because of the short term, right here and now, the cost of living challenge, which is huge for families across the country, but also the longer term challenge of getting our growth rate back up again to where it used to be a decade or so ago. And I think to kickstart that growth, I actually think tax cuts are essential. I don't think it's a choice, really. Now, we have the highest tax burden as a country in almost 70 years. I think that is having a negative impact on growth, whether it's work incentives for people, for business and investment. And I think the growth that we want to see does not happen unless we have the tax cuts. And once we then get that strong growth, that is exactly what's going to pay for all those public services that you and your viewers, your listeners, that you rely on, like me and everyone else.
And what about the gap in between? So we stimulate the economy, we start to hopefully see the growth that we both want to see. Are we, however, going to see Liz Truss buckle to a Treasury that will call for big departmental cuts to the Home Office, maybe in policing, cuts to education, maybe in schools? What will her answer be? Will she resist those cuts?
I don't think we're going to see that at all. And let me explain for a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, the Treasury will dance to the tune of its masters, the ministers, right? I mean, as you said at the start, I mean, I ran the Treasury, and there is people talk about the Treasury orthodoxy, and there's a Treasury sort of orthodoxy about wanting to aim to balance the books. There's nothing wrong with wanting to balance the books. That's what Conservatives believe in. The question is, how do we get there? And what Liz has recognised, to properly balance the books in the long term, we need to get our growth rate up. It's before the financial crisis, it was about sort of 2.7% a year, and now in the last 10 years, it's been about 1.7%. That extra 1 percentage point difference makes all the difference in terms of balancing the books. Now, where there is any resistance in the Treasury to this, it can't be business as usual. But I believe that, hopefully, if Liz wins, that once she gets in there and installs her new team, and she's sort of won fairly and squarely, she will set out to bring about those changes quickly. In fact, she said she will have an emergency budget within weeks of taking office, and I think that's the right way to go about this.
But having said that, she's not prepared to put her figures in front of the OBR. Now, that's not something you would have countenanced as Chancellor, or your former close colleague, George Osborne. Why won't she do that?
Well, because as I understand it, if I've understood your question correctly, Nick, is that the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, that works for government, and it only looks at government proposals, from the government. Now, but whether it's Rishi or Liz at this point, they're not speaking on behalf of the government. They're sort of setting out their stalls, and no doubt, if Liz was to win, then whatever she sets out and what will be in this emergency budget, like all budgets, it comes with an analysis from the OBR. So I think that kind of transparency is good, and it will come in due course.
Well, if that's the case, that's good. The reports I was reading today were suggesting otherwise. But listen, can we move on to something that I know will have been across your desk as Home Secretary, and you will know, obviously, I have a close interest in the subject. Tyson Fury has come out and basically he's said to the government, after the tragic loss of his cousin, look, why are we not introducing tougher sentencing, mandatory prison sentences of a substantive length for those carrying knives? He says the government are not doing enough. Now, you know that actually there are mandatory sentences in at the moment if you are convicted of carrying a knife twice. But over half of offences in the last year that would have qualified for a mandatory sentence, they're not going to jail. It's absurd. The courts are not doing what Parliament and ministers ordered. Is it time to rewrite the law and make it utterly without discretion, so those who persistently repeat offenders carrying knives that go on to kill people in the end, but carrying knives go to jail?
Well, look, you mentioned Tyson at the start there. I was very sad to hear about his cousin. Equally, I was very sad indeed to hear about Thomas O'Halloran, the 87-year-old granddad that was murdered in such a brutal way. And you're right to talk about the importance of this. And if I could say, I think there's two things that need to be done to tackle knife crime even more. I mean, first, there's what the government does in Westminster. Then there's also what happens at the more sort of regional, local level. At the Westminster level, over the last decade, since the Conservatives have been back in office, the laws have been tightened on this. They are a lot stricter than they were before. And in fact, just last year, through Parliament, a new police and crime sentencing bill, as it was then, now an act, has gone through, which has further strengthened the law in a number of areas, including crimes of this type. But by the way, that was opposed by the Labour Party. And so that's good. And also the investment in police numbers, which Liz has pledged to continue. Alongside that, by the way, she's also going to do, and I think this is a good idea, to do crime league tables to sort of throw more of a spotlight on what's happening, especially at regional levels. I think that kind of thing helps. Now turning to the other aspect of this, which is the local. When you look at London, for example, and I picked London because, a lot of your listeners might be in London. It's our biggest police force by far. And we've seen, sadly, a lot of this crime, particularly knife crime, in our capital city. What matters a lot is what the person who runs policing does. And that person is Sadiq Khan. And I think Sadiq Khan has let the people of London...
Well, he thinks the weather's to blame. But let me push back a little bit, Sajid.
By the way, just on that, Nick, I mean, if I remember, a few weeks ago, he said it was, I think first he said it's the cost of living crisis. Then he said it's the weather. Then he said it's a school holiday.
Yeah.
There's always an excuse in Sadiq's world. And what we need to do is stop playing politics.
But let me press you. You're no problem with that. But let me press you, because everything you have said, we have in a short been doing it before, promising tough sentencing. Actually, it's a minimum 6-month sentence. Isn't it time to say that actually we are going to strengthen the laws? We're going to bang you up longer. You are basically a thug who is carrying a knife, and you're persistently doing it. It's time. People want this. What has our country come to, that an over 80-year-old man can be stabbed to death in broad daylight?
Well, I mean, that was shocking, and of course there can be no explanation of something so horrid at all. But as well as sentencing, Nick, I think what is also perhaps even more important is prevention.
Agreed. But what about sentencing? I agree with you about intervention. We don't disagree, Sajid. But can't you press Liz?
And let's talk about prevention for a second then, because you agree that, when I was Home Secretary, I brought back stop and search. It was stopped by my predecessor but one, which was Theresa May. I brought back stop and search, especially in our capital. right? And the police, then at the time, obviously with Commissioner Sadiq, they adopted it and they brought back stop and search because it prevents knife crime. It keeps knives at the street, acts as a deterrent. And it also means that, look at Thomas O'Halloran, the grandfather that was murdered in such a way. It was with a knife, and these kind of things. Prevention is important. Now,
Sajid, Sajid, only for time reasons only, I let you get that point out about intervention. I'm really grateful for you joining us. That was Sajid Javid. Yes, he's on intervention, but no word on tough sentences there.